Hello, I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein. Welcome to American Architecture Now. Today we'll be talking to Stanley Tigerman. Stanley Tigerman is Chicago's most important architectural gadfly. He is widely known for his bold buildings as well as his outspoken ideas. It's a very real pleasure to welcome you here today, Stanley. Stanley, whatever gave you the idea to be an architect?
I read The Fountainhead when it was first published in 1943, and I was in the 8th grade, and I bought it.
Did you ever meet Ayn Rand?
Yes, much to my regret. Many years later, when I was a student in graduate school at Yale, she was doing a symposium at the law school, and I attended it because I'd always wanted to meet this woman who actually had changed my entire life. And I went up afterwards and told her that it was because of her book that I'd become an architect. And she just put her hands on her hips, cocked her head, and looked at me and said, "So what?"
And what was your reply?
Well, I was crushed.
How did your family react to your choice of career?
Well, there have never been architects in my family, or for that matter, artists. And they never understood, actually, why it was that I wished to become one.
Did you grow up in any kind of special residence that influenced you?
I grew up with my father's parents, with my paternal grandparents, who had a boarding house. And I was immensely spoiled. I was not only an only child of my parents, but the only child in that boarding house.
Here you are, a nice and apparently very amiable fellow. And you've been called the seasoned guerrilla leader, the enfant terrible, no less, of Midwestern architecture. What prompts the use of such labels?
Do I look like one of those?
Not to
or
me.
Two of those?
No.
I'm a quiet person, short, fat Jewish architect practicing in Chicago. I have no idea what all that means. When I came back from Yale, Chicago was then a product of what can only be called the German invasion. Mies van der Rohe and his elite troops from the Black Forest. And I really wanted to make a home for myself. That was my home, where I was born. And it was important for me to do that, and so I saw them in a way as an enemy in a certain sense. On the other hand, of course, much of my work has been couched in that language as well.
For a long while you put yourself juxtaposed, in fact, a very open battle with the Chicago architectural establishment. And the most ongoing battle was with the firm of Skidmore Merrill. Is it that you're opposed to the idea of large firms in general, or is it just the kinds of projects that they do?
I've always felt that architecture was a human activity, an activity that was concerned with people. Skidmore operated at a corporate level, they still do. And their concerns are with a kind of pragmatism, bottom line architecture, such that one, for many years, could never sense idiosyncrasy in their work. SOM is the product of a kind of eclecticism and refining of other people's work, in this case, Mies van der Rohe predominantly. And I objected to that.
While we're on the subject, perhaps you should say a word about Mies. After all, he is the real establishment in Chicago, isn't he?
He is, but he was a wonderful man, and frankly, I miss him, in the sense that when he was alive, it was those who were influenced by him, which was damn near everyone in Chicago, were closer to the source of the flame because he was alive and well. When he was alive, he was the first to structure change in his own work. After he died, his descendants didn't allow for that change because he wasn't there to lead them.
Well, what influence on your own career did Mies have?
Enormous influence, because first of all, I knew him. He was a very kind man to me. He was a very gentle man.
What did he look like?
He was very big, but at the end of his life, he was in a wheelchair. He was like the cut blocks of stone that his stonemason father in Aachen worked on. He was a big bear of a man with a great, huge, square-jawed head, very elegant, silk suits clearly woven by Korean nuns underwater for thousands of dollars, even in those days.
Did you ever visit him at home?
Yes.
In what kind of environment did he live?
Well, he didn't live in a Mies building. He lived in it's a building that you could find in Berlin or in Munich or Frankfurt today, an old, very sort of Mannerist building with rusticated stone. He loved to watch TV westerns. He drove a two-tone Oldsmobile, or had it driven by Gene Summers, on the West Coast, who was actually his chauffeur as well as his employee.
Did he live with Mies furniture?
He had Mies furniture. He had Mies furniture. No, he had Mies furniture, but he also had very comfortable, large overstuffed furniture. If you saw Mies and saw the Barcelona chair, which is a chair that we together can sit comfortably on, he really fit in the damn chair. He was a big man. It was designed for him. We all design for ourselves in a certain way. It's impossible not to.
Is there anything particularly striking about the way in which he lived in terms of design that we should know about?
The Nazi government, the SS, forced him to leave with some 20-odd books. In fact, he didn't buy many more books in America. He still read St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, Ortega y Gasset. He had a very small but a very selective and precious library, which he reread constantly. He read. Mies didn't do much drawing. He thought a lot. He actually thought about buildings and sort of, there's a wonderful photograph of him puffing on a cigar looking out one of his glass walls. And it's true. I once went to his office. We were working on a project in Montreal. His office and my office, should not compare them in the same breath, but in all events. And I saw him in his wheelchair sitting at one of his people's board, and the guy had a problem with some counter-flashing coping detail. Mies looked at it and said, "Yeah, I will think about it." And I came there again maybe a month later, 6 weeks, some chunk of time. And I saw him back at the guy's board showing him how to do it.
What's your style of working? Do you draw frantically? Do you read? Do you have any special invention of your own?
I draw a lot because that's what I do for a living. I started out a draftsman and I'll die as one. And I draw on airplanes, I do sketches and cartoons and this, and I read.
What continues to make Chicago, the city where both you and modern architecture were born, interesting for you?
Being an architect in Chicago is like being born wealthy. It's, as Mecca is to the Islamic faith, so Chicago is a builder's town. Goldberger, many years ago, wrote a very interesting article, maybe his best piece ever, on the difference between Chicago and New York architecture. Is not that Chicago architects are any better than New York architects, but Chicago developers are much better than New York developers. They are less venal. They are, because of this enormous tradition. Some years ago, I saw a poster at LaGuardia that had a frontal photograph of the Seagram building by Mies, and the only graphics on it were, "This is the only building in New York City by Mies van der Rohe. Isn't it a shame?" Well, in Chicago, there's 45 buildings by him while he was alive. There's over 50 by Frank Lloyd Wright. There's over 75 by the first Chicago school, John Wellborn, Ruth Sullivan's. It's a fabulous city. It's an architectural city.
Whose work most influenced you?
Probably John Haydock. John Haydock is the Dean of Architecture at Cooper Union and has been so for many years, and taught there before that, taught at Yale and Cornell in Texas, and is a product of Cooper Union as a student in Harvard. He's a brilliant architect, and he is simply not just a conceptual architect, he's a brilliant man, and he deeply influenced me. So did Bob Venturi.
There is a group in Chicago with whom you are aligned, and whose members hold ideas that are similar to your own. The Chicago Seven. Tell us who they are and what are some of the common ideals and goals that you share.
It really began in 1976 with the show called Chicago Architects that we showed actually at Cooper Union then, and then brought back to Chicago, which was a show in contradistinction to the Mies canonical show that was going on at the Museum of Contemporary Art called 100 Years of Chicago Architecture, Continuity in Structure and Form. Larry Booth, Ben Weiss, Stuart Cohen, and myself put that show together. We expanded to include Jim Nagel, Tom Beebe, and then Jim Freed, who was at that time the Dean of IIT, since come back to IMP, Money, New York Women, and Wine, where perhaps he belongs. So there were 7 of us. We then expanded to 8 with the addition of Helmut Jahn, then 3 others, Cindy Weiss, Ken Schroeder, and Jerry Horn, to make it 11, but Jim came back here, so we're now 10. And we don't have a great deal in common other than the fact that there isn't an awful lot of backbiting, which makes it a bit different than New York. Is
there a lot of backbiting in New York?
Oh, I would say that there's a fair amount.
More than other cities, yes, and more than other professions?
I mean, the people that you interview, you should interview them looking at their back, and you can see all of the scars and blood through their jackets. The point is that in Chicago there is a genuine concomitance of interest, and it's like a Navy wives club.
Where is the center of architectural thought these days, and where is the center of architectural practice, and are they one and the same?
New York architects think that the center of architectural thought is in New York, and that the center of architectural production is in Chicago, or if you like, the East Coast versus the Middle West, Middle America. Of course, notice that we keep out the West Coast, which is really another country. The San Andreas Fault has actually occurred. How
has your own notion of architectural quality changed or evolved during the course of the years?
You know, architecture is a series of oppositions. It's dualistic. Every one of us wishes to leave behind children, books, buildings, tracks to sort of reflect and show that we were here, the trace of our existence. So every one of us has continuity and all of those things in mind. On the other hand, life is finite. It's also imperfect. We will die. We get old, we get wrinkled, and we will die. The best way I can put it, Barbara Lee, is that I was trained as an architect, which I believe to be based on a Hellenic set of disciplines, but I also happen to be Jewish. And I started out my book by asking the question, how come no Jewish mother ever said, my son the architect? How come they always say, my son the lawyer, my son the doctor?
How come?
Because architecture is not a Jewish discipline. It's not. It's a Gentile discipline.
How do you explain that?
Because Christians believe in life after death, and buildings are based on monuments and monumentality and those perpetual value systems. That's where the interest in zeitgeist and a spirit of all of the ages come from. And Jews, on the other hand, are interested in the sanctification of life itself.
How important a role does your religion play in your work?
I think the study of things without an end point in mind very much is a part of the Jewish religion. That's not a part of architecture. So to juxtapose these different things is fraught with a kind of difficult condition.
And how have you worked it all out?
I haven't worked it out. That's the point. What I have done is attempt to do a series of buildings that are ruptured, sheared, pulled apart, left apart, find different ways that represent the struggle, that invite participatory involvement from people, strangers as well as users, such that the building is not an end point in and of itself. Now, often that's why clients build buildings, is they also wish to leave something behind that shows that they were here, that's monumental. Architecture, painting, and sculpture tend to advance what can only be called a zeitgeist, an attitude that says there is a right overriding answer, often couched in the time within what one works. I mean, in the 80s or 70s or whatever. And I no longer believe that.
You've said that there is one kind of architectural morality that is very seldom written about, and that is architecture is a matter of service to the client. Is that something that interests you a great deal?
Oh, sure. I think it was thrown away very rapidly at the end of the 60s, the advocacy set of positions whereby service was a part of what it was that was architecture. I mean, among other things, there are actually clients. Even Bob Ventura will be the first to tell you, as he's often said, that he considers himself a hired gun.
What's the ideal client, by the way? Who is the ideal client?
The toughest son of a bitch out there. The one that really works you out. Absolutely. Not the one that lets you get away with murder.
Charles Moore says that his clients are the starting point for all of his designs. On the other hand, Kevin Roche has told us that his best clients tell him nothing at all.
Well, I think it shows in both of their work. I think both of them are correct. Charles' work shows that his clients are the starting point, and Kevin shows that he didn't even need them at all. I think that's true. I think they both told you the truth.
So what's the ideal house?
If there was an ideal house, Philip Johnson would probably have built it again. I think that people are different, and to the extent that architects accommodate them, thus houses are different. If one looks around one, why is it that Michael Graves' houses look different than Bob Stern's, which in turn look different than Richard Myers, and so forth and so on?
And then why is it that Stanley Tigerman's houses have a keen sense of the ironic?
Architecture is by nature optimistic. You can't believe in the bomb and produce a building. On the other hand, that no longer is sufficient for me, that brand of optimism alone. And so I'm equally skeptical in turn. And so the skepticism combined with the optimism, or the Talmudic theory combined with Hellenic ideality, produces a kind of irony in my work.
How would you describe your style?
No, there is no style. Because I am not, it's the one thing I've always sort of argued with Richard Meyer about. Richard Meyer's buildings are, shall we say, dipped in white. And he's a brilliant, wonderful architect that creates elegant, lovely objects. That his theories override the idiosyncratic, special site and other conditions that make a house individual. My work is, I am an American architect. I could not be a European architect. Contextualism is not my middle name. Those buildings that I do would hardly work in Georgian London, let us say, okay?
What is your middle name, by the way?
No, I don't have any. My parents were too poor.
No, your architectural middle name.
Oh, I don't have one of those either.
Well, we better get one for you. In fact, if you were to select one, what would it be?
Well, I can think of what others would select, which would be irrelevant, ironic, and other such things, because all my clients are different. So I don't feel compelled to design something that has an overriding quality.
What sort of spaces have you designed for yourself over the years? Do they represent the central ideas of your work?
The only thing I've really ever designed for myself, I'm in the process of doing with my wife, Margaret McCurry.
Herself an architect.
Herself an architect, and my partner. And we're building a weekend house in Michigan on the lake, which is a bit more hers than mine. And it's sort of screwed up because she's an Episcopal from Lake Forest that graduated from Vassar. So it's very odd. You can imagine that juxtaposition in architectural terms. It's a great struggle.
How does your professional collaboration work out? Who does what? And who decides who does what?
Well, there's actually three of us. We have a third partner named Bob Fugman, and we're all very different people. And we all predominantly do different things. And we all fight and argue as any sort of collaboration does. And sometimes one or another of us wins. I mean, we're all very different. Just working alone isn't simply not enough, no matter what other architects may feel. For me, it isn't enough.
One of the major contributions that you've made to architecture and to Chicago was a library for the blind. A library for the blind that is a structure of very bright colors. Isn't that a bit of an odd thing given the users?
The last thing that people who are legally blind see before they go totally blind is bright color bathed in light. So the color is used to code the building. That is, yellow is structure, blue is software, red is the perimeter of the building.
What else makes that building special?
Well, everything is fixed. That is, there's no movable pieces of furniture because movable objects are very difficult for blind people because somebody can move them and the next time they come there, where they expect things to be, they're not there. So it's all fixed.
Another recent house of yours, and this one I believe is on the North Shore of Long Island, you've described as Lutyens-like in design. Tell us about that plan.
The house is sheared such that it's a two-story with two one-story kind of wings which telescope out of the two-story. So it's two-story gables becoming one-story, becoming bay windows. And where the point of the rupture is the place between the sort of sacred and the profane.
You mentioned earlier a design that you were doing for a new Knoll showroom in downtown Houston.
Yeah.
How do you like that somewhat unusual project?
I love it. The Knoll showroom is a remodeling of this building done in 1917 that was originally, it turns out, a showroom. a furniture showroom. And then it fell into disrepair. It was a sort of a truck storage building and warehouse and stuff. And in the process of pulling the building apart and seeing what the structure was, we discovered this. And so I tried to replicate that architecturally. So the building, in a sense, has been ruptured by this kind of jagged line.
In what direction is architecture going presently?
Bob Stern works in his way. Graves works in his way. Little will change that, I would hypothesize. Almost nothing will change Richard Meyer. I mean, things will continue to go on in their way. And because these very forceful and important people represent differing attitudes about things, and because none of them are actually winning, so to speak. There is no one right way. Before the late 60s, Barbara Lee, American architecture was very sure of itself. Mies and Corbu had won, and their descendants were everywhere in that sense. The end of the 60s, the revolution, inner city problems, black revolutionaries, and all advocacy planning, and all of the social concerns rejected all of the products prior to that time. It was at that time that Vietnam and Venturi's book came out at the same time.
What is, if there is, the architectural spirit of our time?
For the first time, the modesty that would suggest that one is not sure of oneself as a nation, of one's values, of the process of life itself, of the telescoping of time, of things that change. For example, fashion has always been a dirty word in architecture. To be interested in such things is to be trivializing the permanent notions of architecture. I'm very interested in fashion. Certainly one is interested nonetheless in perpetual value systems. It's the sort of rubbing between those things, I think, that makes American architecture, which for the first time is developing, is showing its frailty.
Well, what's the most challenging assignment that you've ever had?
In the words of Frank Lloyd Wright, my dear, the next one. Of course. I don't like to clip coupons on whatever little talent I have. The idea is to look ahead.
If you had it to do over again, what would you do otherwise?
My grandfather never worked for a living. He spent his days in the attic, in this bed, wearing his long johns, reading Kant, Descartes, Hegel, and Talmudic exegeses. And I think if I grow up, I'd like to do that. I think that if I had it to do again, I would do that, and I still may, because I find that I'm reading less architecture and more of that as the time goes on.
Did you ever expect your life to unfold the way it has?
No way.
Is there anything we haven't talked about that you'd care to?
The whole condition of the developing of an American architecture is, I think, for the first time since Frank Lloyd Wright looked westward, in the process of becoming. I think that American architecture is beginning to walk that ridge without falling for the overriding legitimate right way of making things and producing work. And that's the best part of these years that I, and others of course, are around at the time that that's evolving.
For your willingness to share your challenging ideas and your very special manner in expressing them, our thanks to you, Stanley Tigerman, for being with us today.